Welcome to the Newsbrief podcast, where the everyday Christian can get caught up on a week's worth of news in 15 minutes without opinion and much bias. I am your host, Isaac Lopez, and this is presented by the Life Given Radio. Usually five segments, 3 minutes apiece. But this week, we're doing something slightly different. It's just the Newsplash, so some highlights. And then we will take a momentary break in the broadcast, in the show. And you guys can, if you want to step away, feel free. But we're going to introduce the brief breakdown, where I talk about a couple stories that maybe weren't included in the report, or that I actually do want to discuss. And today we are going to get into a topic that is near and dear to my heart. But I will make it a very noticeable end of the segment, so you guys can click off if you don't want to hear my opinion. Without further ado, let's jump in. A Senate official ruled out the implementation of a federal $15 minimum wage in the latest coronavirus relief package. It would need to be considered with another piece of legislation or as a standalone bill. Senator Chuck Schumer said, "We are deeply disappointed in this decision. We are not going to give up the fight to raise the minimum wage to $15 to help millions of struggling American workers and their families. The American people deserve it, and we are committed to making it a reality." On to sports. John Geddert, a former Olympics coach for the U.S., committed suicide following multiple allegations of several crimes, including human trafficking. The 63-year-old coach has reportedly lied in previous investigations. In health, Dr. Fauci says that even people who receive COVID-19 vaccinations will not be able to eat indoors. And I quote, "So here are things, even if you're vaccinated, that you're not going to be able to do in society. For example, indoor dining, theaters, places where people congregate. That's because of the safety of society. You yourself, what you can do when you are together with another person, we're looking at that. And we are going to try and find out very quickly what recommendations could be made about what people can do." End quote. On to faith, family, and freedom. Crystal Deck, the alleged best friend of the bomber Anthony Warner, who was involved in the Christmas Day bombing in Nashville, says that she should have picked up on hints of his intentions prior to the attack. Per a New York Times report, she said, Deck said that she had no idea about the magnitude of Warner's plan, but he had told her that he was plotting something that would bring the police to her door. Warner had also played her the song that he blasted out moments before detonating his bomb, Petula Clark's hit Downtown, and she had caught him editing the female voice he played out of his vehicle's loudspeakers. Deck said she believes Warner's terminal cancer diagnosis, combined with his obsession with conspiracy theories, led to his plot. End of report. On to some good news. Pastor James Coates was recently thrown into prison in Canada for holding a church service at Grace Life Church for violating lockdown rules. Why is this good news, you may ask? Well, in short, James 1:2-4. "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." And amen. Now, if you enjoy the Newsbrief podcast, you may like the brief newsletter, which will continue to have reporting like this, or in the future it will. Sign up for that in the link below. If you want to drop a tip on a story, or you want me to talk about something else, email me at thebriefnewsbrief@gmail.com. Also, if you want more reporting from more reporters who share a similar vision to myself, check out the Life Given News, and I can tell you that this week we are going to have a story written by Kat Kowalik, and you will want to stick around for that. That is going to be a fascinating report, a little longer than the site's average read time, but well worth it. The team has been working very hard on this, and in particular, Katerina, so stick around for that. This site is dedicated to reporting in succinct and honest ways. If you're interested in writing for The Life Given, reach out to me at thelifegivenandreceived@gmail.com. If I have been non-responsive this week, that's just due to my schedule. Continue to email me because we want to grow the team. We want to cover more stories, and I'll get to that in a moment. Follow me on the social medias if you want. You know where I am. And before we close out this segment, please like and share the show. Whether it's this podcast, whether it's Micaiah Shaw's podcast, The Industrious, or Kip and Mai's podcast, The Cut and the Dry. This radio station, if you will, is growing, and anything that you can do to help it grow is wonderful. So in conclusion, remember that who the real enemy is, Ephesians 6:12. God bless, and I will speak with you in the next segment. Okay, I've given some time. I'm going to take a drink of water here, and we are going to kick off this inaugural segment called The Brief Breakdown. Now, I've explained to you in previous episodes what I would like to do here, but basically get back into some discussion around stories that we do, that we report on, that have been maybe trending throughout the week and need a little bit of more of a gentler approach than just the sharp knife with which I cut when it comes to reporting. And it can be pretty blunt, but in the brief breakdown, I just want to give a few minutes synopsis or some saturated thoughts on a couple stories that we might have covered. This week, it's not necessarily stories, but journalism. I want to make the distinction between journalism and mudslinging non-stories. And my hope for this show, as we continue to roll through 2021 at a very fast clip, is that this show, my podcast, will not devolve into mudslinging nonsense that is not newsworthy. So the things that I bring on, the stories that I report on in this podcast is for your benefit and hopefully will help educate you to what is actually going on in the country. Now, there's a lot of things that we can discuss, a lot of ways that we can break down some stories that I would classify as non-stories. Now, let's just go with that term, non-stories. What I am talking about, you can find in 5 seconds on any news site. I'm looking at CNN right now. I'm looking at theblaze.com, two completely different news sites when it comes to worldview. And yet they have a lot of these non-stories I'm speaking about. So, for instance, let's just start with The Blaze. This story I would classify as a non-story. This headline: liberals unleash wave of vicious racist and sexist attacks against WAPO reporter over a tweet from Biden's OMB nominee. Now, how is that a story? That's not a story. In my opinion, this is what I would say is a non-story. This idea that this is newsworthy. The fact that someone tweeted something or a group of people said something so inflammatory about someone else that everyone else needed to get in on the action. Like somehow just reporting on these flash in the pan opinions that no one's going to remember a week from now, I think really just feeds into this need to have news 24/7. Flip over to CNN. Okay, a couple of the headlines I think are good. reporting on Biden's orders to strike for airstrikes in Syria. The federal judge rules eviction moratorium is unconstitutional. There are plenty of things. But then something such as McConnell says he'll absolutely support Trump in 2024 if he's the GOP nominee. That's an actual title, and that's in bold on their homepage. If you go to CNN.com, I would classify that as a non-story. I don't really care. I want to report on stories that are actually going to affect you and I. When it comes to stories that aren't non-stories, rather those stories that are being put into legislation, adventures that are taking place around the country right now, things that are actually physically happening or are the quantifiable culture wars, instead of these catchy headlines and snippets that of Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi or Donald Trump lashing out at the media, I find not newsworthy in the slightest. Rather, I think that is just building and breeding discontent throughout the country, and people feed off of that instead of doing their own critical thinking. Anyway, rather longer segment than I would have liked to, but those are my thoughts on non-stories, mudslinging non-stories versus actual journalism. And I hope that the brief breakdown does not devolve into mudslinging non-stories, but rather we discuss actual stories that matter, actual stories that you would be interested in hearing a bit more of discussion about. So with that, we'll leave off and close with this. We'll just repeat the same closing, but remember who the real enemy is. Don't get distracted. Ephesians 6:12. God bless, and I will speak with you all next Friday.